Hey everybody, we got an exciting video today because today we are talking about Alex Karp and Peter Thiel, two completely polar opposite sets of people. Peter Thiel is on the right wing. He's a libertarian. He believes in Ayn Rand's philosophy of rational egoism, someone who thinks you have to be selfish in order to be selfless, someone who thinks you don't need to care about the rest of the world. You need to care about yourself because caring about yourself is the most ethical way of being alive. And you've got Alex Karp, self-described as a socialist, studied in Germany abroad, got a PhD in what amounts to essentially progressive philosophy, and truly believes that the way in which we should have economic justice is more redistributive versus individualist. How do these two people come together with polar opposite different philosophical viewpoints on the world and come up with a company that can one day become the most important software company in the world? Today, we're going to talk about it. Before we get into it, take a look at two videos on how Alex Karp thinks about Donald Trump and how Peter Thiel thinks about Donald Trump. We'll be back in a second.
I've had the rare opportunity to meet Trump, which I turned down. Like, I mean, this is off the record, but like, I don't respect, I respect nothing about the dude. Like, you could almost make up someone that I find, it'd be hard to make up someone I find less appealing.
Now, I don't agree with everything Donald Trump has said and done. And I don't think the millions of other people voting for him do either. Nobody thinks his comments about women were acceptable. I agree, they were clearly offensive and inappropriate. But I don't think the voters pull the lever in order to endorse a candidate's flaws. It's not a lack of judgment that leads Americans to vote for Trump. We're voting for Trump because we judge the leadership of our country to have failed. Now that someone different is in the running, someone who rejects the false, reassuring stories that tell us everything is fine, his larger-than-life persona attracts a lot of attention. Nobody would suggest that Donald Trump is a humble man. But the big things he's right about amount to a much-needed dose of humility in our politics.
As you can see from those videos, both of these guys think about the world in a fundamentally different way. Karp is really opposed to Trump. Peter loves Trump. In fact, Peter was basically out, like, he was hated in Silicon Valley in 2016 when he finally came out and said, I support Donald Trump. I want him to be the president, actively campaigned for him. And Karp, internally in that video you saw, was telling his employees, look, I really don't like the guy. So they both have different political views, both fundamentally think of the world in a different way, but they've come together to be able to make this company. I have three main reasons why I believe this partnership works and why I think this partnership and the polar opposites of the leaders at the helm of this partnership actually lead to potentially one of the most transformative companies in the entire world. The first reason is that polar opposites make for an interesting mix when it comes to personalities developing, which produces outcomes. Number two, you only get a company like Palantir in particular when you have polar opposite viewpoints, and I'll talk about what that means. And finally, number three, what does this mean from a business sense, which is more Peter Thiel, and from an inspirational, motivational sense, which is more Alex Karp. So first, let's talk about what it means to be polar opposites. Look, this is a pretty simple argument. When you have things that are different, there's a reason why they say opposites attract. When you have things that are different, they're more likely to come together versus when you have things that are the same. Now, that may be unintuitive because you're like, well, if I'm the same and someone else is the same, we have more things that we share in terms of values, which means we're able to get along a lot more better. That can be potentially correct, but there is a unique special magic to when something is different than you and how you are different than something. There is an attraction that is involved in that. A lot of times, if you've been dating someone for a particular time, you start to want to have different elements to their personality. You don't always want to agree with them. You want to see different versions of their life and have their perspectives challenge you because it creates a more intimate relationship and chemistry within the person that you're attracted to. Now, some of the macro level things you probably want to be the same on in terms of like maybe religion, for example. But there are some internal differences that are good to have when you have polar opposites. Additionally, when you are opposite from someone else, you're curious about why you are opposite from them. If you are at least an open-minded thinker, someone who is not ideologically dogmatic within the opinion that you are in, which we hope most business leaders and CEOs that are able to build big companies are not ideologically drowned within their own opinions, then you're actually able to see different perspectives and want to see different perspectives. The seeing of those different perspectives creates a unique relationship within the way you choose to operate your company, operate your brand, operate whatever you're trying to run, because those different perspectives offer insight into something you could not have thought of before. If you essentially only believe that being a Democrat is the best thing in the world, and you never even think of what it means to be fiscally conservative but socially liberal, which is what I would say a libertarian more generally is, then you don't even understand different perspectives of how the government reducing taxes actually could be very beneficial for the people that you want to help as a Democrat, which are more marginalized poor people, because lowering taxes might stimulate the economy. And if you stimulate the economy, you have more jobs because you have more people who are willing to take more risks because they have an incentive to take risks because of rational egoism, right? Things are done in your self-interest, the nature of human nature, without having to feel that if they take a risk and start these jobs and build this company, then the government's just going to tax all their money, which would ruin the incentive for them to do it in the first place. If you never even thought of that perspective, because you weren't open-minded, then you would never see how an opposite opinion towards yours actually influences the direction and trajectory of the outcomes you want to receive based upon your own values. This is why I think polar opposites are actually extremely beneficial in business, in life, in relationships, and for people that aren't dogmatic and that are willing to see the other side. Essentially, things get boring when everything's the same and you need more excitement. Now, number 2, and this one is exciting to talk about. I think you only get a company like Palantir when you have polar opposites at the helm of the leadership of a company like that. So there's a couple of reasons for this, a couple of subpoints behind this. Palantir is one of the most unique transformational companies in the world. It's why I cover it so heavily. It's why I'm really getting so entrenched into just understanding the nuances of this company, because I think of this company not as a company, but as a philosophy. I mean, the name in and of itself, and I'm doing a video on this later, is literally named after a Lord of the Rings reference, which has a lot of sort of deep meaning behind how that name even came about. It is a philosophical viewpoint on how you want to exist in society, how you want to transform society, how you want your relationship with society to become, more than I think it is a company. But because of the masterminds and geniuses that are building the infrastructure for a business behind Palantir, it becomes a very valuable company. Being a philosophy before a company, I think, is a prerequisite to being an amazing company, right? So let's think of Facebook, whether you like it or hate it. The philosophy is let's connect the world together. And then the company side of it, the advertising business model, all that stuff is debatable. But the philosophy was there at the forefront before you get this gigantic social network that actually connects the world together. Number 1, Palantir is only a company that can happen as a result of Peter and Alex that are polar opposites, because they're a company that protects civil liberties, Peter, but maintains the ability to protect the collective as a result of protecting civil liberties, which is Karp. So when you look at individualism and then collectivism, individualism is Peter Thiel, collectivism is more Alex Karp. Palantir is a company that says, hey, we're going to protect your civil liberties, which means when we give data when we work within a business, when we work with the government in particular, and we're managing massive amounts of data sets, when we're giving advice to the CIA and FBI on how to use this software to properly manage data, intrinsic in the fabric of the technology of this company, and this is not debatable anymore. I mean, I've done a lot of videos on this. I'll probably make a playlist about Palantir and civil liberties because there's just so much information out there, and people get confused when they see the misinformation and the misleading headlines. If you actually look at the patents they filed, at the blogs they put out, at the interviews Alex Karp has done all the way from 2009 talking about civil liberties, and the fact that they've literally maintained a relationship with the government for almost 2 decades, and you couldn't do that without maintaining civil liberties, without actually being able to protect data, then you start to realize that Palantir is a company that is actually trying to protect civil liberties, meaning not overreach or misstep your data, which a lot of the tech companies are known to do because they are able to sell it for advertising. Palantir is not oriented in that business model. When they work with the CIA or FBA, they are making sure that technology at its core has the ability to not give certain forms of data or let people see certain forms of data that are confidential and rooted towards the individual. That is a very Ayn Rand individualistic type of idea because you don't want the government, the collective, taking advantage of the individual. Now, the only reason this matters is because you're able to maintain protection for the collective. So it's kind of like if Palantir didn't work with the government, and I've done some videos on Peter Thiel talking about how they've likely stopped terrorist attacks. They were likely monumental in finding a lot of terrorists over the past couple of years that we don't even know about. Then you wouldn't have a software that could actually protect the world, right? And that's why they think they could be the most important software company in the world. So if Palantir has been known to help the government stop counterterrorism efforts, which is why they get all these contracts with the government and other companies don't, then that means they're doing a net good for society because they're stopping terrorists from hurting society, right? They're stopping bad things from happening. So that's a collective thing. That's more in the camp of collectivism and socialism. You're helping the people, right? The government is doing a net good for society. The government's getting bigger. But at the same time that the government's doing that, the means by which it's doing that is only through an individualistic civil liberties-based focus mentality. So this is the dualistic, symbiotic nature of Palantir, Alex Karp, and Peter Thiel. You've got one guy that says, hey, let's protect civil liberties, and not saying the other guy doesn't agree, but sort of that's the main philosophy on one guy. And the other guy saying, let's protect civil liberties in relationship to how we can help the collective. Those are two different viewpoints coming together to ultimately develop into a product that can be useful for the entire world based upon two opposite philosophies. Number two, why polar opposites interact with each other, or the subpoint B under number two about you only get a company like Palantir with polar opposites. Palantir stays away from the herd, and when I mean herd, I mean the crowd, and when I mean crowd, I mean Silicon Valley. But in doing so, it helps Silicon Valley and the entire world. So again, part of being an individualist, part of having your own path, part of being a trailblazer for an idea that you believe in that no one else can see, and you're not willing to take crap from anyone around that idea that you so passionately believe in, is blazing your own path forward. And the reason I believe Palantir left Silicon Valley this year or in 2020 is because they were like, screw this, we've had enough of this. Like, we are being demonized as a company that's actually working with one of the most liberal Western actors in the world, i.e. the United States, to protect human rights, freedoms, dignity, all this stuff. And you guys are telling us that we're bad people, even though you guys are filling dopamine into little teenage girls on Instagram, right? It's like they were like, this is ridiculous for us to have to deal with that type of environment. And that's not a good workplace culture environment for our employees. So they go to Denver, Colorado. They left the herd. Part of the Peter Thiel philosophy is let's leave the herd. Let's not engage with what the herd. It's why he is a contrarian by nature. And sometimes being a contrarian can be bad, but I think more often than not, it leads to positive business outcomes and life outcomes because you just stay away from what everyone else is doing. And usually when everyone else is doing something, it's probably lame and mediocre. And if you do something different, those people start looking up to you because you were actually willing to take the risk to get away from what everyone else is doing. So they left Silicon Valley. But in doing that, they ended up helping Silicon Valley writ large and the world. Because Google, for example, left the United States when the United States approached them to help them with their artificial intelligence and their software. They said no. It's been rumored that Google may be working with some other companies, and Google may be working, with some other actors, let's say, or not companies, other countries that Google may be working with that are not necessarily the most the best. Palantir says we don't work with those countries because they are adversaries of the West. So because they're adversaries of the West, and if we were to help them with their technology and their ideas get better, then that means their regimes, their values ultimately are propagated throughout the world, and we provided them the technology in order to be able to do that. That's not something that Palantir stands up for. That's not part of their mission. So by staying away from the herd, you have the sort of individualist idea that I'm going to do it by myself. But by doing so, you get the collective benefit of protecting the entire United States and actually being the one company to step up and say, hey, we're going to work with you. We're going to create the best technology and software for the world because you are the company that we want to actually be able to take the world forward, not other types of countries. And because we left Silicon Valley, we left the toxicity and negativity there, and we went against the grain, that ability for us to do that is now allowing us more opportunity to not care about what other people think, but rather help the government do what they need to do, which is protect Western values and Western freedoms. So they've made a definitive stance by saying, hey, we're going to help the US government because we believe in their values, even if other companies are not going to do that. And as a result, you get this dualistic nature again, helping the collective by being an individualist, which is this whole amazing philosophy to me around Alex Karp and Peter Thiel. Alex Karp would obviously be someone that wants to help the collective because as a socialist, you care about the collective good of all people. Well, helping Western liberal values be achieved, if you believe that those values are the best values in the world, bar none, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, right? Those are good values to have. Then you need to be able to align yourself with institutions that are obviously embedded in those values, like the US government. But in order to do that, you've got to also go against the collective, which is Silicon Valley. And that's where I think there is such a unique relationship between what Karp brings and what Peter brings to the table. Final thing I'll talk about. The business acumen, I think Peter has at the highest of levels. I mean, people already know about this. I don't have to go into this. Peter is a business guy. He understands business at a level that most people don't. Karp is a unicorn in terms of his ability to inspire and motivate people, his ability to talk, his ability to be eccentric, his ability to get ideas out there, his ability to retain talent that is hard to retain is one of the most unique reasons why I'm invested in Palantir. So you've got this business guy coming in, bringing all these different sets of business philosophies and business connections actions in order to get stuff done, right? To produce results for investors and shareholders. And then you've got this inspirational guy who comes in and is like, hey, how do we build a company culture? It's the entire reason Karp didn't want to go public for so long, right? His entire argument was like, if we go public and scale, we have to be accountable to investors. And in order to be accountable for investors, we have to produce results. Well, in order to produce results, we've got to scale. We've got to move quick. We've got to be fast. We've got to be efficient. We got to go do stuff. But I can't lose company culture to do that. So the reason they went public in 2020 was because they finally thought it was time to scale while maintaining company culture. And if they were able to maintain company culture, then they were going to have the best potential to actually get things done. So you've got this one guy who knows how to inspire people in a company, maintain talent, and be able to, get things actually done in the world. And you've got this other guy who's rooted in business, kind of like cutthroat business, two polar opposites again coming together to produce a company that I think only two polar opposites could come together to produce, like Palantir. So those are my thoughts. I hope you guys enjoyed this analysis. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. This is one of the reasons I'm so invested in Palantir. You've got someone who's a self-described socialist. You've got someone who's on the right wing who believes in libertarian, Ayn Rand, rational, egoistic values. You put those together and you ultimately come up with this philosophy for a company. That philosophy mixed with the company releases into this product that could potentially be the most important software company in the world based upon what they can do with that product to help the entire world. Really interesting stuff. Thank you guys for watching this video. Looking forward to the comments. My name is Mitt. I'll see you in the next one.